Esto es un conversatorio entre amigos, no es algo oficial del IB. La idea es compartir conocimiento. Le damos la bienvenida a todos. Esperamos que sea de mucho provecho este conversatorio y que salgan ahí intercambios de conocimiento, opiniones bastante ricos.
Okay, so welcome, good afternoon to everyone. The idea is that I'm just going to guide you through some of the things that I particularly know about. I'm going to be giving you some tips. I'm going to be trying to give you some insight on how, especially how to evaluate the extended essay, okay? Because this is probably one of the things that most of us feel a little bit insecure in. Like, am I providing a realistic grade? Because in the end, we are supposed to give like the grade that we think that the extended essay is going to have. So we probably think, am I doing this right? Is it really an A? Is it really a B? What is the difference between A, B, and C, and so on and so forth? So I'm just, this hour and a half, more or less, we're going to try to just go through these things. And of course, I'm going to try to answer all of the questions that you have, okay? So as we have been discussing, this is going to be about the extended essay specifically for language B English, okay? So today, what we're going to be doing are these things, okay? We have 4 points to cover, which is basically the English B categories, because sometimes we have a little bit of confusion, especially between category 2 and 3, which is a little bit confusing. So we're going to go over that. I'm going to be, of course, accepting questions. We're going to be talking about some things to try to figure out in which category would we classify them, okay? After that, we're going to go over the overview of assessment, okay? We're going to be covering one by one all of the criteria for assessment, okay? With just some general insight, of course, because, I mean, this workshop, well, this talk, we could convert it into a full day workshop, probably 2 or 3 days. So we only have like an hour and a half, almost 2 hours probably. We're just going to go over the general aspects. And of course, if you have any questions, well, you're going to be able to ask them. I'm going to be providing you with some examples of extended essays. As I said at the beginning, these extended essays have the grade and also the comments. And finally, we're going to have an opportunity for questions and sharing. What do I mean by sharing? So sharing the experiences that you already have, okay? This is going to be great for us because we can compare, and we're going to try, and we're probably going to understand that we're not as lost as we think we are, okay? Because probably sometimes we are kind of like in that situation where like we say, oh, I'm not sure of what I'm doing. Well, probably many people are the same way. So if we're not sure of what we're doing, it's many of us, okay? So we're just going to try to do our best and see what we can do, okay? So let's do this. So as you may know, if you've read the guide, especially for those who are new, the first thing that you have to do is read the extended essay guide and go over the part specific for language B, okay? In here, you're gonna find most of the answers, and I say most of the answers, meaning 99% of them, okay? And the first thing that we have to think of is that language B has 3 categories. Our extended essays and English can be written under these 3 categories. And of course, we're going to go one by one, and I'm going to be providing some examples of each. So the first one is an analysis of a cultural context or a specific text. Number 2 is an analysis of trends in the culture studied and the impact of a cultural change on the form or use of the language. And number 3, which is my personal favorite, an analysis and comparison of literary texts, okay? So the first one, which is category 1. So as I just read, it's a specific analysis of the language, its use and structure, normally related to its cultural context or a specific text. Now, we might think, okay, so how do we analyze language? Well, this is a category that I personally think that it is the most challenging. Why? Because it has to do with linguistics, okay? So the student who dares, and I'm going to say dares, to try and write an extended essay in category 1, he or she must be very good at linguistics, okay? Because you're going to be analyzing the language, its use and structure, okay? And you're gonna have to do that and relate it to a cultural context or a specific text, okay? Now, look at the research question example that I have here. How are political correctness and rhetoric deployed in opinion columns in the New York Times and Daily Mail, okay? So this person is going to have to find opinion columns in the New York Times and Daily Mail, number one, okay? And number two, he or she is going to be analyzing the linguistic aspects of political correctness and rhetoric, okay? So, I mean, this is a very challenging research question right out from the start. And this person would have to first define what political correctness is, what rhetoric is. He or she is going to have to identify the bias present in both of the newspapers. And then this person is going to have to analyze how language defines these things, okay? So this is going to be a little bit challenging probably, but hey, there are some people that might want to do it, and that is 100% okay. Now, in my experience, I would say that not many people choose category one because again, it's such a challenging category. And in my whole experience, I've only seen one extended essay written in this category, okay? So they're not very common, and therefore we're probably not gonna find too many of them, okay? So yeah, there we go. Now for category two, in this case, we have two different things, okay? We have two subcategories in this one, okay? So category 2A would be the impact of a particular social cultural issue on the form or use of the language based on examination of language use. Now, this one is a little bit more popular because we're going to be relating a social cultural issue and how this issue transformed or uses the language, okay? So we're going to be basing our research on proving how the two things are connected. We're not necessarily going to start with the language, but we're going to start with the social cultural issue, okay? So for the first example of this one would be, to what extent has the rising popularity of social media jargon seeped into standard English, okay? So this person would probably like go into Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of the social media, and try to find words that were created because of social media. For example, we're gonna have words like meme, which is very popular around the world, okay? Because it represents a specific text of image, we could call it, okay? And it usually related to humor. This person is going to be probably studying the transformation of acronyms from LOL back in the 90s, right? Laughing out loud, all the way to how it is used right now, to YOLO and all of these things, okay? So this one is a little bit more, it's a little bit easier because you're going to just find first the social cultural issue that we have over here, and then analyze how it has changed language, okay? Or how it has influenced the language in this case. It doesn't necessarily only have to be with social media. It could be through the analysis. I read one that it was the analysis of rap and how rap, like the culture of rap has seeped into different parts of New York specifically. So they started analyzing Brooklyn and they started analyzing other parts of New York and how that language has influenced that. I also saw one once on the culture of basketball in the United States, so the NBA, and how like apparently they have some variations of language in regards to some of the things. So I think that this one is an interesting case. Now, for category 2B, we have a social cultural issue as illustrated through specific cultural artifacts. And we're gonna see what these artifacts are in a moment. From a country, community, where the language is spoken, okay? So what does this mean? That they're going to find a cultural artifact and they're going to analyze it specifically in that culture, okay? So for example, we have here the research question, which is, to what extent does the Arizona Senate Bill 1070 and other similar legislation in Arizona reflect the state's targeting of specific minorities for profiling, thus perpetuating common stereotypes? So this one is, again, a little bit challenging because it's such a sensitive topic, I think. So this person is going to get the Arizona Senate Bill, which is a cultural artifact, okay? And here she is going to separate or identify the parts of language that target specific minorities for profiling, okay? So you might think, oh, this is it's going to be kind of difficult, but it's not so much, okay? Because it's just basically finding specific parts of language that is going to do this. Other examples that I have seen is based on graffiti. So how graffiti express some sort of messages throughout the specific culture. I saw one on the analysis of Banksy, which is a very famous graffiti artist, in which he states political messages basically. But the interesting thing is that he rarely uses like written words. It's usually based on images. So it was kind of interesting to see how this person like made the connection between one and another, and how that basically illustrated the social cultural issue. Another one that I have seen is basically, for example, the use of poetry or certain poems in the 60s and 70s in the United States, specifically with the civil rights movement. So they started getting poems from Maya Angelou and all of these different authors, and they started like analyzing like how these poems affected the society. Okay, so they weren't analyzing the poems itself because that would go into category 3, but the influence of the poem into the society. Okay, now a big question that I always get is, what is a cultural artifact? Okay, and this is a screenshot that I took from the extended essay guide. So a cultural artifact, so for 2B, a cultural artifact include anything concrete or tangible. Okay, it has to be concrete or tangible that helps to give insight into the target culture, such as written documents. So it could be a newspaper, magazine, news headlines, articles, books, etc. It could be spoken documents, for example, a screenplay, radio or television programs, song lyrics, and interviews. It could be a visual document, so for example, a work of art, architecture, it could be buildings, etc. And cultural icons such as fashion items and accessories as a manifestation of culture, food items, dishes as a manifestation of culture, brands as a manifestation of culture, etc. Now, we have to be very careful because even though it says books, somewhere around here, okay, screenplays, it could be lyrics or whatever, we must be careful because sometimes category 2B and category 3 are going to be confused a little bit. And we don't want this to happen because it is very important to make the difference, okay? Now, it says here on the bottom, the following do not qualify as cultural artifacts. So political events, elections, referendums, historical events, social movements, that is riots, social issues, for example, employment, immigration, etc. Towns or regions, ethnic groups, media trends, styles of music, sports, tradition, institution, etc. Now, why can they not be considered a cultural artifact? Because they're not necessarily tangible, okay? When we think of something tangible, it has to be something that remains the same, okay? What do I mean by this? That it will not be able to transform. If you get a poem, the poem is going to be the same now and 100 years. The interpretation is probably going to change, but you can get the poem and use that in 100 years, no problem. But however, if you're going to study a political event, that is not necessarily going to be something tangible because it can change, okay? So this is what a cultural artifact refers to, okay? Now, for category 3, which is my favorite, as I stated before, it's an analysis of a literary type based on a specific work or works of literature, exclusively from the target language, okay? So In this case, what we're going to analyze is, yes, a novel, a poem, any type of literary device that you want, but what we're going to analyze is based on literary theory, okay? We're not going to analyze the impact that that particular story had on society. If we did that, that would be category 2A or 2B, I think, okay? If we're going to focus only on category 3, we're only going to focus on the study of the literature, okay? On the literary theory from that particular story. We have here the example. In what way does the character Winston in George Orwell's 1984 represent the inverted version of the archetype, the hero and his journey? Okay, so 1984 is a novel that could be analyzed from a socio-cultural perspective. Okay, however, the research question here, the focus of this research question is going to be completely literary. So nothing outside of the book, let's say. Okay, nothing that we're not going, this person is not going to say, okay, this book meant a change for society because of this and this and this. No, it is going to analyze only what is inside the book, okay, or the story in this case. Now, this one is very particular because this research question came from one of the students that I supervised. And what he thought after reading the novel was, isn't Winston is not the hero, okay? So we have the archetype of the hero and his journey, which basically goes up and then goes down. And he said, well, in this case, Winston does the opposite. So why can't I propose that there is something as the inverted version of this? So he looked it up and he didn't find anything. He didn't find anyone who had already established this for 1984, I'm sorry. And so he basically came up with this literary concept, which I found pretty amazing. Now, after we have analyzed the categories and the student has chosen which category he or she wants to work in, we must be clear on this, okay? At submission, and this is a very important aspect of extended essays, okay? This is do or die, basically, okay? So at submission, the category of the language B essay must be identified. What does this mean? It means that if you are going to write an extended essay in category 2A, it must specifically say it's a category 2A. If it is in category 3, it must say this is a category 3 extended essay. Why? Because if there is a confusion in which category it is presented, probably there's going to be a lot of problems for this person. What do I mean by this? It usually, the biggest confusion usually is between category 2B and category 3 because of this, what we have been mentioning. What is a cultural artifact? Can I analyze the story? Can I use it to identify this or this? So if the person says, okay, my extended essay is category 2B, but the whole analysis was for category 3, immediate failure, okay? This person is not going to pass with a good grade. He or she is going to get an immediate E, okay? So we must be sure, 100% sure, which category we are enrolling the student in, okay? So it has to be at submission, okay? And also—
Jonathan, John,
yes.
Sorry to cut you off, but so it must be stated in the extended essay, right?
In the cover page.
On the cover page,
cover
okay.
page, it must say category, whatever. And so category 1 or category 2A, 2B, or 3.
All right,
okay?
thanks.
That is going to be the basis for the evaluation, okay? And also, one of the biggest things that some students, or I have had issues with is the following. Students must have sufficient proficiency in the language to be able to address the assessment criteria. However, superior fluency is neither a prerequisite nor a guarantee of success. What does this mean? Only because your student is 100% proficient and probably even more proficient than we are, okay, doesn't mean that he or she is going to get a good grade. Okay, this person could be a native speaker studying here in Costa Rica, and he or she says, okay, I know English and I'm going to write it in English, that does not necessarily mean that he or she is going to get a good grade, because it's not about the language. Okay, we're going to see that in the assessment criteria, there's not even a criteria related to language. Okay, so it's not about the language, it's about the analysis, it's about the production, the interpretation of the events. Now, on the other side, it doesn't necessarily mean that that student who is kind of wary, I'm not sure if I have the level, teacher, I'm not very good at writing, that doesn't necessarily mean that he or she is going to have an immediate failure. Okay, we can help them out a little bit and say, okay, you're going to need to like rewrite this paragraph, focus on the verb tenses, whatever, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he or she is just doomed. Okay, so I've had the surprise that a student who wasn't not necessarily proficient came out with a grade A. Okay, and I had the unfortunate experience of a student who was basically, who is a C2 level proficiency in English, and he barely passed. He had a grade D, okay? So again, it doesn't necessarily mean that a proficient student is going to get a good grade and a lower proficiency student is going to get a bad grade. So we must let them know, okay? It's not about how you write it, but what you write, okay? About your ideas, about your analysis, about your insight in order to cover the issues that you present, okay? So there we go. Now, let's move on. So we were going to do this discussion based on some topics that could work for the category of extended essay and how to approach them. However, I think that we need to move on, because if not, we're not going to have time for everything else. So if we have time at the end, we're going to come back to this and we're going to share experiences on some of the research questions that you have from your students, okay? So probably think about that, like which research questions have I seen, how would I approach them, etc. But we're gonna move on because of time constraints. Again, guys, this could be a workshop of 2 or 3 days if we really wanted it to, but because we only have an hour and a half, 2 hours, we're just gonna try to move on. And also, if I'm speaking too fast, please tell me to slow down, because sometimes I tend to go on, okay? So let's see, next time. Now, interpreting the extended essay assessment criteria. This is where most insecurities happen among teachers, okay? Definitely in my case, I have, even after 5 years of checking extended essays, I still have this kind of doubt. Am I really putting it in the category it's supposed to be? Am I really grading them how it's supposed to be? So this is just a little bit of insight on each one. And we're gonna go by all of them. So remember that since 2018, the program changed, the criteria assessment changed a little bit. And now we only have these 5 criteria. So focus and method, knowledge and understanding, critical thinking, presentation, and engagement. Again, if you notice, there is no assessment criteria related to language, okay? So this is something that is very important. Now, that does not mean, however, that does not mean that if they write and you cannot understand it, I mean, if they confuse verb tenses and it's a mess and there's no punctuation and it's just, I mean, that has to be clear enough for the point to be made, okay? So, however, they're not gonna be penalized, let's say, for a small grammatical mistake or capitalization or whatever, okay? So that's an important aspect to take into account. Now, again, we're gonna go one by one, okay? And I'm gonna provide examples as well of each criterion, okay? So criterion A, which is focus and method. Now, based only on the name, focus and method, we're not gonna be really sure of what that means. Therefore, that is why we have to read all of the descriptions. These descriptions that I'm providing you are in the guide, in the extended essay guide, okay? So this is just a review of what it is. I think, or I hope that all of you have already read this, but anyway, it's a good idea to review them. So the research topic must be summarized as a sharply focused question. Okay, number 1, research question, okay? must be a question. Although this sounds kind of like kind of obvious, but sometimes the students don't really think in questions. So you ask them, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to explore the civil rights movement. So what is the question that you're going to ask? What do you mean the question? So we have to make sure that they ask a question, okay? So the purpose of the research investigation must be outlined in the introduction and should clearly fit one of the 3 required categories for language acquisition extended essays. What does this mean? The introduction must state, okay, the research or the purpose of the research and investigation. If it is not in the introduction, there's something wrong with your extended essay, okay? The methodology used or the approach to the topic chosen should also be addressed early in the essay. So basically, the student has to explain what is he or she going to do, okay? So in category 3, for example, I had students that what they did was a summary of the novel in the introduction. That is not what we want, okay? I mean, there can be a very short indication of what the story is about. So for example, in the novel 1984, you can mention, well, it was written by George Orwell in year whatever. It's about the character who does this and this and this, period. We don't want the whole chronology of the story. We don't want the whole plot chart. No, that's not what we want in the introduction, okay? Now, something that is very important is that the student's personal experience or personal opinion is rarely relevant here, okay? So in the introduction, we don't need opinions, okay? We don't need personal experience. This is something that we save for later, okay? But in the introduction, when the student is just mentioning what is going to happen, we don't need that, okay? Opinions usually go in the body and conclusions, okay? So this is something that we have to pay attention to as well. Now, for category 1 language and category 2 culture and society essays, the introduction must make clear how the chosen topic is specific or of special interest to the target culture and or language. What does this mean? If I am going to analyze language and I'm going to analyze culture and society, it has to be related to a specific target culture or to a specific form of the language. Which language? English. Which cultures? English speaking cultures, okay? Why? Because I had a student who wanted to analyze like the influence of Swahili and certain aspects of society. Unfortunately, that is not category B English. I'm sorry, language B English. That would be language B Swahili, okay? So it has to be related to a specific English speaking culture, okay? And a specific, well, in specific language, which is right now English. Now, there could be an analysis of the difference, for example, the differences between South African English and American English, or Australian English and British English, or something like that. That would probably fall into category 1, okay? Or you could also analyze, for example, how language is used differently, or how some words mean something different in one culture or the other, okay? So that would go probably into category 2. But again, there must be a target culture and language, okay, which are related to English speaking. Now for category 3, it's a little easier because the research question is an analysis of a literary type, and all text considered must be originally written in the target language, okay? There cannot be any translations. So it is not necessary that the setting or subject matter be directly related to the culture. Why? Because if we are going to be analyzing a work of fiction, I mean, if it's a fantasy work like the Chronicles of Narnia or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a reflection of a specific target culture. But, okay, it must originally be written in the target language, which in this case is English, okay? So we must pay attention to this. Now, for example, I had the question of Les Miserables, okay, translated into English, cannot. Okay, why? Because it was originally written in French, okay? Could it be, I even received a question about the Bible, okay? Well, no, because first of all, that I don't think that, I mean, if you analyze it from literary point of view, probably it would work. But again, because it was not originally written in the target language, I would probably be wary of using the Bible. And also, depending on what you're going to be using with, it would not be a good idea. Criterion B, knowledge and understanding. This is related basically to what they're going to be using for the extended essay, for their research. So students must consult authentic reference materials, mainly, but not exclusively, written in the target language, depending on the category of essay being undertaken. So again, now, whatever references they use, we should try to make them be in English. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it must be originally written in English. What do I mean by this? For example, in the category 3, if I want to find the definition of character, let's say something as basic as character, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to find an English author who wrote the definition of character in English. Okay, they can use whatever author they want, and it could be in Spanish and German and whatever, and they can use that definition as character. Why? Because it's something that they're going to be using, one of the definitions that they're going to be using to analyze or to produce their extended essay, okay? Now, of course, if it is category 2 and 2B, and they're going to be using a cultural artifact, well, yes, this should be, or this must be originally in English, okay? It says here that students need to demonstrate an ability to use appropriate material from their sources and references in order to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of the topic within its cultural context. So what does this mean? It doesn't necessarily mean about filling the extended essay with quotes, okay? It's about using those quotes. So if you're going to use the definition of character, why are you using that definition? It's not just to fill in words, not just to get to the 4,000 words and that is it. No, no, no. So why are you using this source? What does it give to your point? Okay. And students should should strive to integrate primary and secondary material to inform the wider context and implications of the questions. Okay. So we should know about primary and secondary sources. Okay. This is something that they should learn in research methodology, and probably, hopefully in your schools, they teach the students a little bit about this so they can like know how to investigate. So yes, they should try to combine both. Now, of course, for category 3 literature, they only need one source, or the minimum they need is one source, which is the piece of literature that they're going to be using, the work of literature that they're going to be using. Anything other than that, of course, it is welcome. Okay. So it says here for category 1 and category 2, this knowledge must be based at least partially on primary sources. Okay. So the elements that they're going to be using for their research question must be at least partially on primary sources. Okay. So a primary source can be chosen from, for example, specific cultural artifacts, such as advertisement, song lyrics, and legal documents, or from a variety of texts such as poems, graphic novels, and brochures or pamphlets. Again, I mean, a poem would be considered a work of literature. However, it's not the poem itself that is going to be analyzed, but the impact that it gave, okay? Kateli is asking, can the use of the author's bio as secondary source to help them with their literary analysis? Well, if they approach it as, let's say, as like how the life of the author altered the story or influenced the story, yes, it could be. So for example, you could say that George Orwell in 1984, he went to Second World War, and those experiences in Second World War motivated him to write 1984. Okay, so that means that yes, to some extent it could help, like to make a reference to that, but it wouldn't make the general argument based only on that. Okay, So it could be like as a support for the argument, okay? For category 3 literature-based essays, all primary text must have originally been written in the target language. Again, as I said, must be originally written in English. While secondary sources may help to provide a framework, the quality of the student's understanding of the primary text forms the main focus of the analysis. Again, it's not that we're going to get quotes and quotes and quotes and quotes from other sources and put them together to build an extended essay. That is not the point in a category 3. The category 3, or in both, or in all of them, is that the student produces something, okay? So a category 3 essay should contain reasonable use of expected literary terminology in the analysis of the works. What we were saying previously is not about giving a summary of the book. If you give a summary of the book, I mean, that is not even an extended essay. That is just a summary, okay? So we're not going to go through the book and say, well, in the exposition, the character did this and this and this, and then in the rising action, and then the climax. No, it's not about narrating what happened in the story. It's about using that story in order to produce something. Now, it should contain, I would even change it to must contain reasonable use of expected literary terminology. Okay, what does this mean? That they're going to have to investigate a little bit if they don't take English literature, or if they're not very clear on some literary terms, they must study on them because it is expected to be a literary essay, okay? Ariana, yeah, I will definitely send this PowerPoint presentation to everyone, okay? Now, next criterion, which is criterion C, critical thinking, okay? So what is critical thinking? Well, students should give their essays depth by developing an argument based on the research that results in relevant, meaningful conclusions that are consistent with the evidence present, okay? So if they're going to prove, if they say that they're going to prove A, well, the analysis, the arguments that they use should be related to proving A, okay? Because I've seen many cases in which they say, oh, yes, I'm going to do this and this and this, and then they write the extended essay and they figure out, well, I didn't really answer my question, okay? So they must make sure that they're answering their question. That is the whole point, okay? And all of the arguments and all of the analysis that they're going to be doing must be relevant to that question, okay? Now, personal views or assertions should not simply be stated, but need to be supported by evidence and reasoned argument, okay? This sounds a little bit obvious, but we need to constantly remind students, it's not because yes, okay? So it's not because you think so. It's not because you believe, no, like what states it, okay? So going back to the example of the inverted journey from the character Winston in 1984. What proves it? So where in the story can you prove that he was doing it the other way around from the original journey? Okay, so the student had to find instances in the text and state, okay, in this part he says this and this and this. That means that he was in this stage. And then he does this and this and this, which turns him to the next stage, and so on and so forth. So he basically found evidence inside the book that proved his point. It's not because he says, oh yes, I think that he is an inverted hero because I think so. No, there must be some proof, okay? Critical thinking in this context will show knowledge and use of persuasive analysis and argument to support the interpretation or point of view expressed. Again, it must sound convincing. And this is probably one of the biggest issues that our students have. It's not about the amount of words, it's about the quality of them, okay? So let's make sure that they understand this. Also, they think that 4,000 words is a lot, but in my experience, the challenge has been to reduce it, to get down to 4,000 words instead of having to write more, because usually 4,000 words is not enough to prove certain points, okay? And then we have secondhand interpretations or viewpoints that are derived solely from secondary sources or are purely descriptive or narrative in nature will not be rewarded. What we were saying, guys, it's not about just stating the obvious. It's not about just saying, okay, I have 20 quotes and the 20 quotes say this. No, why am I using each quotation? This is very important. There cannot be a random quotation inserted in the text. If there is a quotation, there must be a reaction from the student. Okay, this is a very big rule that I apply with my students. If you're going to use this quotation, say something about it. Why is it there? Why is it relevant to the point that you are proving? Okay. Next one. So it says for category 1 and category 2 essays, a mere compilation of facts, a description of events, or a list of features will not suffice. Again, okay. So it's not about giving the chronology of the decade of whatever and how the influence of the civil rights movement did it. It's not about saying in 1960 this happened, 1961 this happened, and so on and so forth. No, there has to be more. And for category 3 essays, students must be aware that straightforward description of a literary text for plot summary or narration of the action does not advance an argument and should generally be avoided. Again, guys, it is okay to mention at the probably in the introduction what the general story is about, okay? But you're not going to waste 1,000 words summarizing the story, okay? Just mention the author, when it was written, and in a couple of lines what the story is about, and leave it there, okay? Because you're not going to give a summary of the story. You're trying to prove a point, okay? Now, although where a little known text is under discussion, a brief description may be appropriate. What does this mean? If you're going to refer to a specific instance in the text, you're probably going to need to give a little bit of context of why that is relevant. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have to summarize the whole story, okay? So the relevant information to support the argument of the essay should mainly come from the primary text, okay? So if you're going to prove that certain character is the representation of certain archetype, it must be clear in the text. You're not going to say this character is this archetype because another author said so. No, it has to be clear and evident inside the text, okay? Moving on. Criterion D, which is presentation. This is easy enough because it is related to the accepted academic standards for the way in which research papers should be presented, okay? So if your school prefers to follow APA style, well, it must be clear that it follows APA style. If it is MLA, it should be MLA. If it is your own style, go ahead, but it must be presented in a single style, okay? It also relates to how well these elements support the reading, understanding, and evaluation of the essay, okay? So, although the name extended essay, probably when we think of essays, we think of the 5 structure essay, which is introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Let's remember that an extended essay can go beyond that. So an extended essay can have a section and subsection structure to the essay with appropriate informative headings. This will be dependent on the particular stylistic conventions of individual languages and category of essay chosen. Thus, students need to be aware of the appropriate format for their chosen subject, okay? So if they want to do an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion, for an extended essay, each paragraph is going to be huge. So I would separate it into smaller categories. So yes, introduction and a subsection, and then in the body, if we're gonna have 3 main arguments, we'll create 3 separate subsections. And then in the conclusions, you're going to state which are your conclusions, okay? So it's not about only following this format that we always learn about, but breaking it down so it is easier to read, okay? I'm not interested in reading a 5-page paragraph, okay? Which is sometimes that is what students do. They just go on and write and write and write and write, and then they figure out that they haven't placed a period in like 5 pages, okay? So it's very important that they divide the extended essay into appropriate sections, okay? Now, the use of charts, images, and tables is accepted, okay? Especially for categories 1 and 2. Now, In category 3, there you could also insert some sort of chart, like an image or whatever. However, any visuals that they include must be selected and used only if clearly relevant to the topic being discussed, okay? I have had many students that say, oh, teacher, can I put a picture of the cover of the novel that I'm going to be reading? Like a picture of the cover of 1984. So my question is, why is that useful? How is that going to prove your point? If it is not going to do it, if it's only for decoration, don't. Okay, because it must be useful for your argument. And this applies for all of the extended essays as well, not only in English or language, but in all of them as well. Don't put pictures just because, okay? Don't use images just because. They must be useful for your argument, okay? Now, images and charts don't speak for themselves. This is something that is very necessary that the students understand, okay? Any illustrative material used within the body of the essay to help clarify an argument needs accompanying discussion or analysis in order to be effective. If I am going to be presenting a chart or statistics on whatever, so what? Okay? Why is this useful? How does this help me prove my point? I am not just going to put in an image that is very nice, like a picture of the character. No, why is that relevant? Okay, so if they're going to be using cultural artifacts, for example, certain paintings of certain style, I don't know, okay, of romanticism or whatever trend there is, and they put a picture, let's say, of the Mona Lisa, I don't know, something like that. That's the only picture that I can think of. Why are they using it? What are they analyzing from the picture? Okay, so we must be clear on that. The students must be clear on that. Claudia says, one of my students is writing category 2 using Spider-Man and the impact it has had on American teenagers. She is using this as a cultural icon. I told her to use images from the comics. What do you think? Again, Claudia, if the image, is the image going to only be for decoration, or is the image going to prove something? So, for example, I would think of like using one image of Spider-Man and finding another picture from the internet or wherever that shows people wearing Spider-Man's costume or fashion related to Spider-Man or something like that. So in this case, you could probably compare, like, this is what happens in the comic book and this is what real life people are wearing. So you have to have some discussion there. It's okay to use images, but there has to be some discussion of why that image is relevant, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So it says here, if analyzing an advertising campaign, for example, the student may find it useful to include the image within the text for easy reader reference and to aid the flow of the essay. So again, for example, in Claudia's example that she is giving us, it would be easier to, if you're describing Spider-Man's suit, it would be easier to also include the image that you're describing, okay? Because then you can save words basically and not try to do linguistic gymnastics, as I like to call it, to describe something that is abstract, okay? So you just can say, look at the head, and the head that has this particular design, period. And you don't have to describe the design and blah, 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 okay? Edmund says, I need to leave, okay. Have a good day. And thank you for joining us, Herman. Okay, so again, guys, anything, if you're using charts or images or whatever, it has to be relevant and there has to be some discussion related to them, okay? Then we have the final criterion, which is engagement. So this criterion assesses the student's engagement with their research focus and the research process. It will be applied by the examiner at the end of the assessment of the essay and is based solely on the candidate's reflections as detailed in the RPPF, with the supervisory comments and extended essays itself as context. Okay, so this is based on the reflection. Okay, this is based only on the reflections. So this criterion assesses the extent to which a student has evidenced the rationale for decisions made throughout the planning process and the skills and understanding developed. Okay, so this is the last one that we grade. This is the last one that we use because it's at the very end of the process and it's after filling out the RPPF, okay? So for example, students may reflect on the approach and strategies chosen and the relative success. So they can say, well, this approach was better for me because of this and this, or it wasn't, okay? The reflection doesn't necessarily always have to be positive. This is something that they must understand. They can say, it was difficult for me at the beginning, and that is okay, because that shows the process, okay? The processes to learning skills, the approaches to learning skills they have acquired and how they have developed as a learning. So again, very related to the IB, the approaches to learning, the students should know about this in order to apply them. How their conceptual understanding have developed or changed as a result of their research. So, and I've had students that try to prove something and they find out that what they're trying to prove is opposite to what they thought, okay? So that also shows growth. They can say, okay, I was mistaken at the beginning, but because of the process, I was able to change my mentality in whatever subject that they were analyzing, okay? It could be challenges faced in the research and how they overcame them. So for example, if it was difficult for them to find primary sources, they could state it there. It was difficult for me to find someone who is alive in 1920 or something like that, okay? To talk to them. It could be about questions that emerged as a result of the research. So basically it could mean further questions like, what could I continue this with? What questions were left unanswered for me? Okay, could I expand my research? Could I continue doing it? Okay, and what they would do differently if they were to undertake the research again. Okay, so these are some common things that the students may reflect on. Igor said, should this info be placed under a specific section or title? This goes into the RPPF, okay? This is, the RPPF is another document that they have to attach at the end of the extended essay. So it's basically a three-part document in which they reflect on basically at the beginning, middle, and end of the extended essay, okay? Kathy Lee says, my high school students have to start writing a small reflection, but at this stage of the extended essay. They're revising primary and secondary sources and such. Does this reflection count in the final grade? No, Kathy, this reflection is unrelated. The reflection that they are doing at Valle School is unrelated to the RPPF. Okay, this is something that the other teacher is just asking them to do, okay? And Igor says, thanks. Okay, so far so good, guys. We've covered all of the criterions. Now, all of this information is probably a little bit difficult to grasp because I've been talking and I've been rambling on for almost 20 minutes nonstop, okay? So it is easier if we see it like this, which is basically the condensed assessment criteria for the 2018 guide. I am going to give you this in a PDF. I'm going to send it to you with all of the materials, which basically gives us a summary of all of the criteria and the amount of points that we are supposed to assign, okay? Now you notice that here on the left, we have 0, 0, and then we have 5 or 6 for criterions A, B, D, and E. And for criterion C, which is the one that has the most points, 10 to 12. Now, biggest question that I always get is, what is the difference between a 5 and a 6? Why are they in the same category? Or between a 3 and a 4, a 1 and a 2, what is that about? And even bigger, between a 10 and a 12. So what is an 11, okay? And this is something that I always get questioned about. So, and my experience is the following. If the student did an amazing job, okay, let's say in focus and method. So the topic is communicated accurately and effectively. The research question is clearly stated and focused. Methodology of the research is complete, okay? So everything is 100% achieved. This student would get a 6. But if there is a little bit of doubt that there's something that you feel as the professional, that you feel that there's missing, then you give them a lower point. So in this case, it would be a 5, okay? So when there is doubt, if the category is accomplished or not, we usually give them the lower grade, okay? As a piece of advice, it is usually better to go under than to go over in terms of moderation, okay? So that is just a little piece of advice for me. So if it is clearly not one category, but it doesn't necessarily advance to the second one, then you can give them the lower number. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear with this point that I'm trying to make. Does anyone have any doubts about this? Because we're gonna make a break right now for questions. No? So far so good? Okay. So obviously I'm going to send this to you so you can have it. This has helped me a lot. I have it printed and I use it. I have it in my folder with extended essays. So whenever I check an extended essay, I take this out and put it in front of me. So I can start looking at it and referencing with my checking, okay?
John, when you said going under, then it's better to go under than over, you mean in the second, instead of, for instance, if I'm indecisive between 5-6 or 3-4, it's better to go to 4 instead of 5-6 or.
Okay, if you're indecisive between 5 and 6, go 5.
Okay.
If you're indecisive between 3 or 4, go 3.
Go 3.
Why? Because if you're indecisive, it means that there's something missing, that there's something that doesn't necessarily convince you 100% that it should be a 6, for example.
Okay.
John,
Go 5. Yes.
what about if you're indecisive between 4 and 5? Then you go down to 4.
I would go 4 in this case.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Usually in moderation, okay, students have a better chance at success if they're moderated and they have to increase the grade. But if it's the other way around, then all of the students in the generation are going to suffer. So in this case, it's better to go a little bit under than to go over, okay? However, with practice, you're gonna be able to land it right on the point that it's supposed to be, okay? Now, moving on, guys. What am I gonna be sharing with you today? Okay, I'm gonna be sharing, of course, today's PowerPoint presentation with you. I'm going to be sharing the condensed assessment criteria for the extended essay. So this basically what you saw, I'm going to give it to you in English and Spanish. Okay, I'm going to send both documents. And also I am going to include the specific assessment criteria for extended essay. So basically the document which states all of these things that I just explained, okay? And they give a lot more detail than what I just explained, okay? So all of these criterions, A, B, C, D, and E. So it is the specific idea of what each criterion is. So it tells you what a 1 is, what a 2 is, what a 3, what a 4, what a 5, what a 6. It gives you specifically one by one what each category is. So of course, I'm going to give you this document as well. I'm going to be providing examples of extended essays with grades and comments. If we had more time, we would analyze them here in breakout rooms and we would read them and we would give them our grades and why, etc. But of course, we are running a little bit out of time. And of course, my email. So jcalderon@colegiomiravalles.com, which is my work email, and jonathncalderonb@gmail.com, which is my personal email. I'm providing you both emails because, well, and just in case one or the other doesn't work at any case. And I will be, of course, trying to answer all of the questions that you have and sharing all of my materials. I have the philosophy, guys, that sharing is caring. So whatever I can share with you, I am glad to, for free. So yeah, I really like sharing and I expect everyone to share, of course. I think that this community, we're all working for the same objective. We shouldn't be competing against each other. So the idea is to share, to help each other out, and I am more than glad to provide with my experience, okay?